University of California, Santa Cruz, this is Democracy Now!
We call on our Palestinian nation to participate in the daily and weekly activities wherever they are located until the 5th of June, marking the occupation of Jerusalem. We are determined to continue the protest of return and breaking the siege.
As Palestinians vow to continue protesting against the Israeli occupation of Gaza, we'll speak to a Canadian doctor who was shot by Israeli forces in both legs Monday while he was helping injured Palestinians. Israeli forces shot 19 medical personnel on Monday alone. Dr. Tarek Loubani will join us as Canada, Britain, Germany, Ireland, and Belgium, among other countries, call for an investigation into the killings, more than 100 since March 30th. Then we look back at the Catonsville Nine. 50 years ago today, a group of Catholic priests and lay people set fire to hundreds of draft records using homemade napalm to protest the Vietnam War and U.S. imperialism. Participants included Fathers Phil and Dan Berrigan.
We have chosen to be powerless criminals in a time of criminal power. We have chosen to be branded as peace criminals by war criminals.
Father Berrigan would write, quote, "Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children." And we get the latest on North Korea's threat to cancel the June 12th U.S.-North Korean summit after National Security Advisor John Bolton said the U.S. should use the Libyan model for denuclearization. We'll speak with UC Santa Cruz professor Christine Hung. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The White House dismissed North Korea's threats Wednesday to walk away from the planned summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This week, North Korean state media said the talks scheduled to be held in Singapore on June 12th might be canceled if the U.S. continues to demand North Korea unilaterally abandon its nuclear arsenal. North Korea also objected after the U.S. refused to cancel joint war games with South Korea's military. At the White House, Trump said, quote, "We'll have to see," when asked if the talks were still on. This is White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
This is something that we fully expected. The president is very used and ready for tough negotiations. And if they want to meet, we'll be ready. And if they don't, that's okay, too.
We'll have more on North Korea and the prospects of a Trump-Kim summit later in the broadcast. In the Gaza Strip, Israeli warplanes launched at least 6 airstrikes overnight in what Israel's military said were attacks on Hamas targets. The bombings came as the United Nations Human Rights Council said it'll hold a special session Friday to discuss escalating violence in Gaza. On Monday, Israeli forces shot dead at least 61 unarmed Palestinian protesters taking part in the Great March of Return. More than 2,700 Palestinians were injured on that one day. After headlines, we'll go to Gaza to speak with Dr. Tarek Loubani, a Palestinian emergency room doctor who is Canadian. He was treating gunshot wound patients in Gaza when he was shot by an Israeli sniper himself earlier this week. New data show the Trump administration has cut the number of refugees allowed into the United States to a near trickle, with an estimated 20,000 set to enter the U.S. by year's end at the current pace. The number would be the lowest since the federal refugee resettlement program was created in 1980. The news came as President Donald Trump lashed out at undocumented immigrants Wednesday, telling reporters, quote, "These aren't people, these are animals."
We have people coming into the country or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals, and we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before.
Trump's comment came as newly revealed documents show his administration sought negative information about Haitian immigrants ahead of its decision to end temporary protected status for nearly 60,000 Haitians, including many who came to the United States after the devastating 2010 earthquake. In one email obtained by the National Lawyers Guild and the NYU Immigrant Rights Clinic, senior Homeland Security official Kathy Newbell-Kovarek asked her staff for data on the number of Haitian TPS holders who are on public assistance, how many had been convicted of crimes, their travel habits, and how much money they had remitted to Haiti. The revelation follows a Washington Post report that several senior officials at the Departments of State and Homeland Security resigned after the Trump administration ignored advice from its own diplomatic experts and canceled TPS for tens of thousands of Honduran immigrants. The Senate voted narrowly Wednesday to reverse the FCC's repeal of net neutrality rules in a victory for advocates of the open Internet. The Senate bill would reimpose rules barring Internet service providers from stopping or slowing down the delivery of websites and would bar companies from charging extra fees for high-quality streaming video. Wednesday's 52-47 vote, mostly along party lines, sets up a battle in the Republican-controlled House. This is California Democratic Congressmember Anna Eshoo, whose district includes much of Silicon Valley.
Fundamentally, this is about ensuring that you, myself, all of us, we are the ones, we are the individuals that decide what we want to hear, what we want to watch, what we want to play, what we want to read.
In a financial disclosure report revealed Wednesday, President Trump acknowledged he made a six-figure payment to his attorney, Michael Cohen, as a reimbursement for a hush money payment Cohen made to adult film star Stephanie Clifford, also known as Stormy Daniels. The disclosure came as part of a complaint against Trump filed by the government's ethics office. Trump's disclosure directly contradicts a sworn statement he filed a year ago. Many legal observers say it appears Trump violated federal election law by failing to disclose a loan to his campaign. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, officials from the World Health Organization have distributed 4,000 doses of an experimental vaccine against Ebola after a fresh outbreak of the deadly virus has killed at least 23 people. An Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014 claimed more than 11,000 lives. Critics say those lives could have been spared if researchers had poured more resources into finding a vaccine years ago. In Chile, thousands of students marched through the capital, Santiago, Wednesday, protesting against widespread sexual harassment and assault at schools and universities and over the failure of school administrators to respond to complaints by female students. This is Paz Gajardo, spokesperson for the Confederation of Chilean Students.
This movement is historic. This march sets a precedent. It's the kickstart that we, the women of Chile, have initiated in response to the sexual allegation claims established across different universities throughout Chile. There are at least 20 to 25 universities undergoing takeovers and stoppages in response to sexual abuses or rapes by teachers and fellow students.
Police later used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the Chilean marchers. The protest was part of a wider student movement calling for free, quality public higher education in Chile. Back in the United States, Michigan State University has reached a $500 million deal to settle a case brought by 332 women who were sexually assaulted by former USA gymnastics team Dr. Larry Nassar, many of them as children. It's believed to be the largest ever settlement of its kind. Earlier this year, Dr. Nassar was sentenced to multiple prison terms of up to 175 years for sexually abusing athletes over decades. In January, ESPN reported Michigan State administrators failed to turn over documents to federal Title IX investigators that outlined sexual assault charges by Dr. Nassar. Politico reports Scott Pruitt's Environmental Protection Agency and the White House tried to block publication of a federal health study on a national water contamination crisis after one Trump administration aide said it would cause a public relations nightmare. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services study would show that the chemicals PFOA and PFOS, which are used in Teflon and firefighting foam, endanger human health at a far higher level than EPA has previously called safe. The study remains unpublished. We'll have more on that story tomorrow here at the University of California, Santa Cruz. On Capitol Hill, Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Chris Wiley told the Senate Judiciary Committee Wednesday the voter profiling company sought to suppress turnout among African-American voters and preyed on racial biases. Wiley testified that Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of up to 87 million Facebook users without their permission and used the data to fight a culture war. Cambridge Analytica was founded by billionaire Robert Mercer. Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon of Breitbart News, was one of the company's key strategists. Wiley said he left the company due to efforts to disengage voters and target African Americans.
Cambridge Analytica sought to identify mental vulnerabilities in voters and worked to exploit them by targeting information designed to activate some of the worst characteristics in people, such as neuroticism, paranoia, and racial biases. To be clear, the work of Cambridge Analytica is not equivalent to traditional marketing. Cambridge Analytica specialized in disinformation, spreading rumors, compromat, and propaganda.
U.S. officials have identified a former CIA software engineer as the primary suspect in a massive leak of the spy agency's documents last year. Joshua Adam Schulte, who designed computer code to spy on foreign adversaries for the CIA, is believed to have leaked thousands of documents last year, revealing CIA programs and tools that are capable of hacking into both Apple and Android cell phones. WikiLeaks published the documents last March under the name Vault 7, calling it the largest leak of secret CIA documents in history. Prosecutors have not brought charges against Schulte for the leak, despite months of investigation. However, in August, prosecutors indicted Schulte on child pornography charges that are unrelated to the leaks. He denies the charges. In North Carolina, thousands of teachers dressed in red flooded the streets of Raleigh around the state capitol Wednesday, calling for more funding for public education and a statewide plan to reduce large class sizes. The protests follow similar actions by teachers in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arizona, and Colorado. And in New York City, a Brooklyn man who spent 17 years behind bars for a murder he did not commit burst into tears on Wednesday as a judge vacated his conviction on murder charges. John Bunn, who's now 41 years old, was just 14 when he was arrested and charged with killing an off-duty prison guard. John Bunn addressed the court after his exoneration on Wednesday.
Y'all convicted and had a wrong man in prison, and now y'all still have somebody that's on the loose that's right now that killed someone, and that families out there running free, and I didn't deserve any of that stuff that y'all did to me. They won't admit and say that I'm an innocent man, but I'm an innocent man, Your Honor, and I have always been an innocent man.
John Bunn is one of more than a dozen people, most of them black men, who've been exonerated based on false identification evidence brought by disgraced former New York Police Department detective Louis Scarcella. Dozens more convictions based on Scarcella's evidence are under review. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The United Nations Human Rights Council has announced it will hold a special session Friday to discuss escalating violence in Gaza after Israeli forces shot dead at least 61 unarmed Palestinian protesters taking part in the Great March of Return on Monday. More than 2,700 Palestinians were injured. This comes just one day after the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, blocked a call for an international investigation into Israel's actions. On Tuesday, Haley repeatedly blamed the violence on Hamas, while praising Israel for showing restraint. But a senior Israeli army spokesperson admitted Tuesday Israel failed to minimize Palestinian casualties during the protests. This is Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, the international spokesperson and head of social media for the IDF, that's the Israel Defense Forces, speaking at a briefing organized by the Jewish Federations of North America.
Have there been mistakes? Have there been bullets that missed their target and hit people that weren't the target? Of course they have. But I can tell you that it is a chaotic environment on the border.
Lieutenant Colonel Conricus also said Hamas, quote, wanted the casualties and called the photos of thousands wounded in Gaza a knockout publicity win for Hamas. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman also blamed Hamas at the Gaza border Wednesday.
I want to emphasize the leadership of Hamas as a gang of cannibals who treat also their own children as ammunition. They have rocket ammunition, there is personal ammunition, and there is a different kind of ammunition, children or women.
For more, we go to Gaza, where we're joined by the Canadian doctor Tarek Loubani. On Monday, Israeli forces shot him in his left leg and right knee while he was treating gunshot wound patients in Gaza. He was one of 19 medical personnel shot in Gaza Monday. Dr. Loubani is an emergency room medical doctor, associate professor at Western University in London, Ontario, Palestinian refugee and member of the GLIA project, creating open-source medical devices for low-resource settings. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, quote, "We're appalled that Dr. Tarek Loubani, a Canadian citizen, is among the wounded, along with so many unarmed people, including civilians, members of the media, first responders, and children." Prime Minister Trudeau called for an immediate independent investigation into the killings in Gaza. Dr. Tarek Loubani is still in Gaza, both legs shot. Welcome to Democracy Now! Thank you for being with us. Can you describe what happened to you on Monday?
Thank you for having me, Amy. Basically, on Monday, I was doing what I've been trained to do for years. I've been a field medic for quite a while. I'm an emergency physician with a specialization in trauma. I do trauma work in London, Ontario, in Canada, where I spend most of the year, and I also do lots of trauma work here. I know where to be. I've been around gunfire an awful lot. I've been at massacres as well, such as in Egypt previously and a few other places. And I tell you, I was, in fact, the least experienced person on the team when it came to gunshots. The paramedics were even more experienced than I was, unfortunately. We were away from the protest area, about 25 meters west, 25 meters south of the protesters. It was calm. Everybody was sort of loitering. There were no tires on fire. There was no chaos. It was a very controlled scene. We knew where we were. We could see the sniper posts. For sure, they could see us. And I was just sort of talking to the medical team. We were testing out some medical devices that we've been trying to make in Gaza because of a shortage. And we had resupplied because we ran out. It was very early in the day, and yet we had run out of our entire supply, so we resupplied. That's when, unfortunately, I heard a loud bang, found myself on the ground, and realized I'd been shot.
And so what happened next?
The first rescuer who came to me was a man named Musa, a paramedic who is excellent and who I've trained with and helped train as well. He sort of came over as like, you know, look, doctor, what have you done to yourself here? Looked at my leg, cut my pants, and started work. He looked at it, it was bleeding, and he said, what do you think? Should we put a tourniquet on? It was a good question, because the fact is that had I been anywhere else in the world, I would have had a tourniquet put on. But we had such a shortage. There have been so many injuries to the arms and legs among protesters that we have a tremendous shortage of tourniquets, which is a belt that you use, I'll show you one after, to basically stop bleeding on people who have been shot. So when he asked me this, I looked and I knew that I needed one, but I thought, we only have 8. One of them is in my back pocket. I took it out, I threw it to them, and I said, no, use it for somebody else. I knew there were many more gunshots to come. They put a pressure bandage. I bled through it, of course, and the next one, of course. But still, I ended up being okay. I got sent to another hospital and treated there. Had I been in Canada, I've asked my trauma colleagues, because like I said, I work a lot of trauma in Canada, and I asked my Canadian colleagues. They said, yeah, you needed a surgery. Yeah, you should have gone in there, cleaned it up, explored it, you know, et cetera, and then kept you in hospital for a while. But in that moment in Gaza, there were so many casualties. I mean, I was brought to the hospital in a vehicle that held 6 patients. So there were so many casualties. I was literally the least wounded one. And so I was discharged because everyone knew that the problems to come for me were going to be later. Deal with it at home now.
Dr. Lubani, what happened to the paramedic who treated you, the one who asked if you wanted a tourniquet put on your legs?
Musa Abu Hassanin was a great guy. I'm talking about him in the past tense because about an hour after he rescued me, he ended up going back to the field on a call, and unfortunately he was shot in the chest. There was so much fire around him and so much live ammunition that his colleagues couldn't get to him and couldn't treat him. And when they finally did get to him, it was about 20 minutes later. The problem he had, it's called a pneumothorax, basically air where it shouldn't be in the chest. And it shouldn't have killed him. I knew how to fix it if I were there. I could have fixed it with literally a Bic pen. But unfortunately, he couldn't receive the treatment he needed, and he died.
He couldn't receive the treatment he wanted because there was so much fire by the Israeli military forces in this area where the paramedics were, that he could not be tended to by anyone else. They couldn't get around him.
They couldn't get to him, no. There was so much fire there, and anybody who sort of peeked out was shot. So even though the rule for us is we just don't put ourselves in a situation where we get shot, we're incredibly careful. We're incredibly careful. He was wearing a high-visibility orange jacket that had been submitted by the International Committee of the Red Cross to the Israeli Army as a paramedic service. I was wearing greens, hospital greens. We were all marked in high visibility. And yet, unfortunately, he was shot, and his colleagues, who were all highly marked, were being targeted any time that they showed themselves. So everybody was to the ground until things calmed down, which took about half an hour.
Dr. Lubani, do you think the other paramedics, how many altogether, 19 killed or wounded just on Monday alone, do you think you were targeted by the Israeli military?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what orders they received or what was in their heads. So I can't tell you if we were deliberately targeted. What I can tell you is the things that I do know. In the 6 weeks of the march, there were no paramedic casualties. And in one day, 19 paramedics, 18 wounded plus 1 killed, and myself were all injured. Or were all shot with live ammunition. Musa was actually in a rescue at the time, but everybody else I've talked to was like me. We were away during a lull without smoke, without any chaos at all, and we were targeted, and we were rather hit by live ammunition, most of us in the lower limbs. So it's very, very hard to believe that the Israelis who shot me and the Israelis who shot my other colleagues, just from our medical crew, 4 of us were shot, including Musa Abu Hassanin, who passed away. It's very hard to believe that they didn't know who we were, they didn't know what we were doing, and that they were aiming at anything else.
Dr. Lubani, I want to ask you about a photo that you posted on Twitter. It shows you and 3 other men from last Friday. You wrote, quote, "A haunting photo, Friday, May 11th, left Mohammed Migdad, shot in the right ankle, Hassan Abu Sada, Tariq Lubani, shot in left leg and right knee, Mumin Silmi, Youssef Al-Mamlouk, Musa Abu Hassanin, shot in the thorax and killed, volunteer unknown, photographer, shot and wounded." Talk about this.
Yep. Yeah, so that was a group photo on Friday after the protests had died down. We were there. We had tended to probably a minimum of 100 people, just our medical crew. There are other medical crews there, too. And afterwards, one of the guys, the photographer, ended up getting shot. He's also a paramedic with an interest in photography. He said, "Let's take a group shot." When we took it, I thought that we were taking a photo that would be lost in my photo album. I didn't think I would be taking a photo that predicted the shootings of 4 of us and the killing of 1 of us. That's why, for me, it was a haunting photo, and that's why, for me, it was such a terrible scene. I'm devastated that all of us ended up being wounded, and I'm devastated that I can't be back on the field. But the reality is that I'm the luckiest one of all of us, because if I want, I can leave here. I can go get treatment in Canada if I want. And realistically, I just got so lucky with my gunshot that I'm probably going to have the least disability of everybody else in that photo who did get shot.
Canadian Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, said, "We are appalled that Dr. Tarek Loubani, a Canadian citizen, is among the wounded, along with so many unarmed people, including civilians, members of the media, first responders, and children." The Prime Minister called for an immediate independent investigation into the killings in Gaza. Dr. Loubani, can you talk about what your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has called for? Canada, Belgium, France, Britain, and other countries, and what the U.S. did at the United Nations this week, stopping an investigation from taking place.
I congratulate Prime Minister Trudeau for representing the Canadian people. It has been a while now that the Canadian people have felt that there is a problem in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, that there's a problem with the way that civilians in Gaza are treated, both as a result of the blockade and as a result of shootings that appear to target civilians. I congratulate the Government of Canada for taking that very courageous step. I'm sure that they're going to pay a political price for doing it. However, what's this investigation going to reveal? What's it going to tell us? And will it change the lives of the people in Gaza? Ultimately, the people in Gaza didn't go out to their protests because they wanted an investigation. They went out to the protests because they wanted a change in the conditions. And so I've called on the Canadian government, and when I've spoken to the Minister Freeland from the Canadian government, I asked her for an infrastructure project, anything that will resolve the situation, or not resolve, but rather relieve a little bit of the situation here. For example, to deal with the electricity situation, we can put solar power on hospitals, which is a project that I've been involved in a small scale. We could do that on a big scale. We could do sewage treatment. We could try to relieve the blockade, build a port, create a way for Palestinians to enter and exit. These are things that will improve Palestinian lives, not investigations. We don't lack investigations, and frankly, while I think that it will be academically interesting to add to the record, I don't think it will change Palestinian lives.
Hospitals in Gaza are continuing to struggle with the thousands of patients who were wounded by the Israeli military just this week alone. Now, again, in the 6 weeks of these nonviolent protests in Gaza, over 100 Palestinians have been killed, over 12,000 wounded. This is Ayman al-Sabani, the director of the emergency room at Shifa Hospital.
The emergency department at Shifa Medical Center received the biggest number of these injuries. We received almost 500 injuries, while the capacity of the emergency department is 20 beds or 20 injuries. We are talking about 25 times as much about the capacity of the emergency department, with all the big challenges and the shortage in medicine and the medical supplies that reach critical levels.
Can you talk, Dr. Tarek Loubani, about the state of the medical system in Gaza and the impact of the Israeli blockade, and describe just what that is? Were you taken to Shifa yourself?
I wasn't taken to Shifa. Shifa is considered the premier hospital in Gaza. However, by the time that I was shot, Shifa was well and thoroughly overloaded. There was a kind of round-robin disaster system, and it was very clear to me that even though I might have received better care at Shifa, that there was no way that I deserved to go there. So I was sent to a different hospital, which provided me great care and did everything that was needed, but was completely overwhelmed as well. Every hospital here is overwhelmed. I work at Shifa as a rule. I work in that emergency room with Dr. Ayman, the one who you showed. And really, the situation there is very dire in normal times. In normal times, I don't have the anesthetics to freeze people when I sew them. In normal times, I can't give people pain medication like morphine. In normal times, it's very, very hard to find even gloves for my patients or gauze for my patients. So the situation is terrible in normal times. Now that there's this disaster that is happening, this disaster unfolding all over Gaza, it's been even worse. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, in fact, I had to very carefully pick who it was that I'd use gloves on when I was in the field because we have a shortage of gloves. Had to pick who I would use bandage on because we have a shortage of bandage. These things are not supposed to be caught by the blockade, but they are. De facto, the hospitals are in a complete disaster scene. And I must say, it makes it so that my complaints about lack of supplies and services when I'm in Canada, it makes those complaints really come into perspective when I'm here just trying for the absolute basics. I wasn't in Shifa that day. I've not been able to go to Shifa since because I can barely walk. Today was my first outing. However, having said that, I have heard from my colleagues at Shifa. They're devastated. They're traumatized. They don't know what to do. They were piling bodies in corners. I mean, it's terrible. They are very good at what they do, but everybody has limits, and every hospital has limits. And if this were downtown New York or downtown Toronto or downtown any other metropolis, they would not be able to deal with the devastation that was faced.
You know, Al Jazeera is reporting that medics on the ground are saying Israeli forces are shooting at demonstrators with a new type of round not seen before, known as the butterfly bullet, which explodes upon impact, pulverizing tissue, arteries and bone, causing severe internal injuries. Can you talk about this? Did you see this yourself, Dr. Lubani, before you were shot and after?
Yes, so I didn't see much after I was shot. I've been recuperating. But before I was shot, yes, I've seen a lot of this type of bullet. You can even hear the difference because they sound different. And so my heart always drops when I would hear one of these bullets come out and hit a patient. And I always knew when we would go to those patients, firstly, that they would certainly need extensive amount of work, both on the field and then in the hospital. And secondly, that their lives would be devastated forever. Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, has released a report on this very unusual injury pattern. On the day that I was wounded, I found a photo of a child who was wounded with one of these shots, which devastated his leg. I was very lucky. I was wounded with a regular bullet. That's why I didn't have my leg amputated. That's why I'm lucky. However, so many people have had this particular kind of bullet used on them. I don't know why that happened. I don't know what particular advantage this bullet has. However, functionally on the field, what it means is sheer devastation, pulverization of bone. Near amputation, we're usually carrying the distal parts, the far part where the shot is, separately because it's just so devastated.
Dr. Tarek Loubani, final words in the last 30 seconds we have with you. As you speak to us from Gaza, both of your legs shot. Your thoughts coming from this region where the Palestinians say they will continue to nonviolently protest.
I came here because I really believe in the idea that every single person, regardless of their race, nationality, creed, even political beliefs, deserves the best medical care. I was not able to deliver that on Monday, and neither were my colleagues. For the first time in almost 6 weeks, we saw patients die, preventable deaths on the field, and that should never happen. And so I want to see a Gaza in which two things happen. One, no medical person ever feels in danger of being targeted. And two, the root causes of the protests, the devastation and desperation, are addressed in a direct way by the international community and, of course, by Israel, who's ultimately responsible for Gaza.
Dr. Tariq Loubani, I want to thank you for being with us. Emergency room medical doctor, associate professor at Western University in London, Ontario. He is a Palestinian refugee, a member of the GLIA project, creating open-source medical devices for low-resource settings, treating gunshot wound patients in Gaza when he was shot by the Israeli military on Monday. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We'll be back in a minute.
El día que amanece lento, recoge solo tus ideas, levanta pa' que tu mirada pa' todo lo que venga. El día que amanece lento, recoge solo tus ideas, levanta pa' que tu mirada pa' todo lo que venga. Semilla que va germinando, paciencia que el enfoque llega, el tiempo que flota en el aire, las horas al viento se entrega. Semilla que va germinando, paciencia que el enfoque llega, el tiempo que flota en el aire y el viento se entrega. De a poco te zafas del miedo, un dedo tras otro lo sueltan, en tu pecho una llamarada que por dentro quema.
Yama, a new song by the Brooklyn band Maku Sound System. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. 50 years ago today, on May 17, 1968, in the Baltimore suburb of Catonsville, Maryland, a group of Catholic priests and lay people stood around a small fire that they had made, praying and singing. They'd gone into the local draft board office and taken 378 draft records for the young men in the 1A category who were most likely to get drafted to go to war in Vietnam. They set fire to the draft records using homemade napalm made from gasoline and laundry soap to symbolize the U.S. military's use of napalm on Vietnamese civilians. They became known as the Catonsville Nine. Video of the act of civil disobedience was seen around the world. I want to turn to the 2012 documentary Hit and Stay, which chronicles the stories of the activists, including Fathers Phil and Dan Berrigan.
We make our prayer in the name of that God whose name is peace and decency and unity and love.
Tonight we're taking our matches, approaching the fire.
We're all part of this.
While people throughout the world, and especially Vietnam now, are suffering from napalm, and these files are also napalm to show that these lives can follow the same fate of the Vietnamese.
Amen.
Napalm, which was made from information and from a formula in the United States Special Forces Handbook published by the School of Special Warfare of the United States.
We all had a hand in making the napalm. It was used here today.
Napalm is a very old weapon. It goes back to the Byzantines. But it really came to public attention during the war in Vietnam. And there were pictures of napalm people. So that was a kind of quintessential symbol of the war. We were burning babies, literally, in Vietnam. So that's why we wanted to come up with something symbolic and also something that would really destroy the files.
Our church has failed to act officially, and we feel that as individuals we're going to have to speak out in the name of Catholicism and Christianity. And we hope by our action to inspire other people who have Christian principles or a faith similar to Christianity will act accordingly to stop the terrible destruction that America is wreaking on the whole world.
We regret very much, I think all of us, the inconvenience and even the suffering that we brought to these clerks here.
We sincerely hope we didn't injure anyone.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. We have chosen to be powerless criminals in a time of criminal power. We have chosen to be branded as peace criminals by war criminals.
The Catonsville Nine were prosecuted and in 1970 given prison sentences of up to 3 years behind bars. Earlier this month, a ceremony was held in Catonsville, Maryland, to mark the unveiling of a new historical marker to commemorate the action. I spoke to Margarita Melville. She's one of the last surviving members of the Catonsville Nine. Margarita, can you tell us where we are right now? What is this building?
The Knights of Columbus rented out the second floor to a selective service registration office.
This was where the draft board was in Catonsville? The
draft board was on the second floor of this building.
So what did you do when you came here May 17th?
Somebody had cased it out for us. Because, I mean, Tom and I had just gotten back to this country from Guatemala and Mexico. So somebody had cased it out, and we thought it was they looked for a place where it would be safe to run down, that we could get out quickly, and that we had a place to burn them that was nearby. So we ran up, but I can't remember exactly where the stairway was. I remember rushing down the stairway, and then we stood here. It wasn't paved, so it was just dirt, and it was easy to put out the fire afterwards, you know, once everything was burned.
So what you were burning was?
The files out of this was before computers, so there was only one copy of each file.
And these were the draft files?
These were the A1 draft files, not just the draft files. Those who had 4A or whatever the other categories were not affected. I just met two men who were deferred because they were in school, and they said, "Why didn't you burn ours?" One of them had to go and serve 2 years after he got out of school. We got as many as we could. We put them in baskets. Mary and I kept the two women clerks from stopping us. I kept they're ready to tackle.
You were standing in front of the clerk?
I stood in front of one. There were two, and Mary in front of the other one. If you wanted to use the phone, fine, call the police. But that was not our interest, because we were going to get finished before they got here.
And so you brought these files down, the group of you, the Catonsville Nine. Did you take any personally down?
No, I personally put a match on them. So we made sure that each one of us participated in the actual burning.
Mm-hmm. And you brought them out here and put them in a trash can?
No, in the middle of the parking area. We circled it and burned the files. And when Tom, my husband, was very sure that every last file was out of the basket, so none got left tucked in there. And so we burned them all, kicked the basket around. It was a wire basket. And so we each threw in a match, and we were able to burn them all right there.
And as you did this with Father Dan Berrigan and Father Philip Berrigan and your own husband.
And John Hogan and George Michie and Tom Lewis and Mary Moylan.
And you had come from Guatemala?
Tom and John and I had been missionaries in Guatemala, where we had seen Green Berets beginning to work with the Guatemalan army and teaching them how to use napalm. Later on, they taught them how to do strategic villages, and they had the pattern down.
And you burned these files with?
Napalm. The recipe was in the Special Forces Handbook. Soap suds in those days, like ivory soap suds and gasoline.
And why the suds?
So that they'd stick to your body and it'll burn and burn and burn, and you can't wash it off real fast.
And that's what the power of napalm
That was napalm. And soon thereafter, my brother-in-law, Art Melville, and Catherine Sagan, and a group of them went up to the Dow chemical offices and went into the file and got all the recipes for napalm and threw them out the window.
Because Dow is the one that
Dow Chemical
napalm.
was manufacturing the napalm. The manufactured napalm. We did the Special Forces Handbook recipe, which was very simple, but very effective.
And how was it used in Vietnam, napalm?
Remember those words of Father Dan saying it's better to burn paper than to burn children? Do you remember that picture of that little girl running down the road with no clothes on because they had been burnt off of her, with a horrible look on her face? That was part of our inspiration. We didn't want that to continue.
Were you afraid as you stood here having burned the files?
No, I knew what was coming.
Were you planning to run away?
No. This is civil disobedience. We stay put. what happened? We stayed put. We waited. We said the Our Father. We held hands and said the Our Father. And when the police came, hi guys, and we got into the paddy wagon and we went to the local jail.
How do you feel standing here on Knights of Columbus property when the monument, the plaque for what you did, is a ways away?
You know what? It's symbolic. It just shows the fact that we're not really in this together as a society. So
explain what happened. Why is the marker down the road?
Because the Knights of Columbus, there's no selective service office anymore, and they just weren't happy with the idea of that kind of a marker on their property.
That's Margarita Melville speaking earlier this month in Catonsville, Maryland, where a marker was dedicated to the Catonsville 9 action 50 years ago today. The late Father Dan Berrigan once wrote, about this action. He wrote, this is what he had to say about the Catonsville action when I interviewed him. He said, our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, the burning of paper instead of children. I interviewed him in 2006 and asked him how he came to be involved in the Catonsville action and why he went underground after his trial.
Philip came up. He was awaiting sentencing for prior action in '67 in Baltimore, where they poured their blood on draft files in the city. And he came up to Cornell and announced to me very coolly that he and others were going to do it again. I was blown away by the courage, the effrontery, really, of my brother in not really just submitting to the prior conviction, but saying, we've got to underscore the first action with another one. And he said, you're invited. So I swallowed hard and said, give me a few days. I want to talk about pros and cons of doing a thing like this. And so when I started meditating and putting down reasons to do it and reasons not to do it, it became quite clear that the option and the invitation were outweighing everything else, and that I had to go ahead with them. So I notified him that I was in, and we did it.
Now, this was after you'd been to North Vietnam.
Right. This was May of '68, and I had been in Hanoi in late January, early February of that year.
With historian Howard Zinn.
Right.
Freeing prisoners of war?
Yes, we brought home 3 flyers who had been captured and imprisoned. It was a kind of gesture of peace in the midst of the war by the Vietnamese during the so-called Tet holiday, which was traditionally a time of reunion of families. And so they wanted these flyers to be reunited with their families.
In Catonsville, was this the first time you were breaking the laws of the United States?
No, I had been at the Pentagon in '67, I think it was in October, and a great number of us were arrested after a warning from McNamara to disperse. And we spent a couple of weeks in jail. It was rather rough. And we did a fast, and we were in the D.C. jail, which was a very mixed lot. So I had a little bit of a taste during that prior year.
You and your brother, Phil Berrigan, had an unusual relationship with Secretary of Defense McNamara. You actually talked to him, wrote to him, met him?
Yes, I met him at a social evening with the Kennedys in about '65. And after this very posh dinner, which was welcoming me home from Latin America, one of the Kennedys announced that they would love to have a discussion between the Secretary of War and myself in front of everybody, which we did start. And they asked me to initiate the thing, and I said to the Secretary something about, since you didn't stop the war this morning, I wonder if you do it this evening.
So he looked kind of past my left ear and said, well, I'll just say this to Father Berrigan and everybody. Vietnam is like Mississippi. If they won't obey the law, you send the troops in. And he stopped. And the next morning when I returned to New York City, I said to a secretary at a magazine we were publishing, I said, would you please take this down in shorthand, because in 2 weeks I won't believe that I heard what I heard. The secretary said in response to my request to stop the war, quote, Vietnam is like Mississippi. If they won't obey the law, you send the troops in. And this was supposed to be the brightest of the bright, one of the whiz kids, respected by all in the cabinet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he talks like a sheriff out of Selma, Alabama. Whose law? Won't obey whose law? Well, that was the level at which the war was being fought.
So, Dan, after the trial, you went underground. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, the war had worsened. In the spring of 70, the campuses were aflame. Nixon had invaded Laos. There was secret bombing going on. The war had widened. It was a bad time to turn oneself in, and we were comparing that order to military induction. It was like saying, well, I'm going off to war. I'm going to obey them and go off to war. I'm going to take the penalty for what we did to make the war evidently unwinnable and unwageable. So a group of us said no go and went underground.
And what does that mean when you go underground?
Well, it meant that the FBI was on your tail and that Hoover was outraged and very angry and kept marking up sheets that we got out, Freedom of Information later, saying, get him, and scrawling all these orders around and putting extra people on our tail.
But you were showing up in the strangest places.
All sorts of places, including preaching in church and getting on national television with a good interview and so on and so forth. So it really increased the edginess of the whole thing.
That's Father Dan Berrigan speaking in 2006. The Catonsville action inspired hundreds of other actions at draft boards across the United States. It also led to a global protest effort to end the threat of nuclear war, known as the Plowshares Movement. In 1980, Dan Berrigan, again with his brother Phil and others, broke into a General Electric nuclear missile plant in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, in the first Plowshares action. The most recent Plowshares action took place on April 4th, the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination, when 7 Catholic Plowshares activists entered the Kings Bay Naval Base, the largest nuclear submarine base in the world in Georgia. They were armed with just hammers, crime tape, and baby bottles containing their own blood. The 7 have been locked up since they were arrested. One of the 7 is Elizabeth McAllister, the widow of Philip Berrigan, a priest at the time he led the Catonsville action 50 years ago today. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
God of the poor man, this is how the day began. 8 co-defendants, I, Daniel Berrigan. Oh, and only a layman's batch of napalm. We pulled the draft files out, we burned them in the parking lot. Better the files than the bodies of children. They had no right before the love of you. I had no right before the love of you.
I Had No Right by Dar Williams. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. North Korea is threatening to cancel the June 12th U.S.-North Korean summit after President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, said the U.S. should use the Libyan model for denuclearization. In 2003, Libya negotiated sanctions relief from the United States in exchange for renouncing its nuclear program and welcoming international inspectors to verify the dismantlement. 8 years later, the U.S. and other nations attacked Libya, toppling and killing Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. We're joined right now by Christine Hong. She's an associate professor here at the University of California, Santa Cruz, executive board member of the Korea Policy Institute, has spent time in North Korea, including a visit to the country as part of a North American peace delegation. Welcome to Democracy Now! Professor Hong, talk about what you think is happening with the summit and what exactly Trump's national security advisor has said, many said, threatened.
Right. So what North Korea right now is stating is that it objects to the fact that the United States and South Korea are engaged in massive war exercises. And this is on the eve of a historically unprecedented summit between the United States and North Korea. So these war exercises, Max Thunder, basically they operationalize 100 warplanes. This includes F-22 nuclear-capable aircraft, as well as potentially B-52 bombers. And, you know, as many people probably now know, these types of war exercises, they have simulated, historically in the past, the dropping of nuclear munitions on the Korean Peninsula in a simulated, quote-unquote, preemptive strike against North Korea. And so recently, the leaders of North and South Korea met. They hammered out a historic Panmunjom Declaration for the peace, prosperity, and reunification of the Korean Peninsula. And what they called upon, or they called for, was actually the denuclearization of the entire Korean Peninsula. This shouldn't be narrowly understood as singularly North Korea's responsibility. This implies a commensurate obligation on the part of the United States. When the United States puts into play on the eve of the summit nuclear-capable aircraft that simulate a nuclear first strike against North Korea rightly sees this as a provocative action that's meant to sabotage the possibility of any sort of peace negotiations. As for the Libya model that you mentioned, you know, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in North Korea, Kim Kye-gwan, just came out with a statement recently and stated that North Korea is under no illusions about the nature of John Bolton's politics and that they find him, and the term was repugnant. And, you know,
now, John Bolton under George W. Bush, and again, he wasn't approved by the Senate as U.S. ambassador to the U.N. at the time because Bush knew he couldn't be, so he made a recess appointment of him. He was instrumental in making sure the U.S. did not participate in basically vetoing a nuclear deal with North Korea.
Well, I mean, as recently as February, John Bolton wrote for the Wall Street Journal stating that the United States should engage in a preemptive nuclear strike against North Korea. So this is the person right now who is, you know, basically fanning the war flames. And what North Korea has often referenced Libya and Iraq as models of regime change. And so when John Bolton is speaking about the Libya model of denuclearization, North Korea understands precisely what that means. That means, you know, dismantle your nuclear program. And of course, North Korea is far more advanced than Libya. North Korea is a de facto nuclear state. And so give up your nuclear program and make yourself completely defenseless and prepare for a war intervention on the part of the United States that will fundamentally destabilize your society.
Do you think this will happen? Do you think the summit will take place?
I hope it will.
We're going to leave it there, but we're going to do part 2, and we're going to post it online and web exclusives at democracynow.org. Christine Hong, associate professor here at University of California, Santa Cruz, executive board member of the Korea Policy Institute. That does it for our show. I'm speaking here tonight along with Daniel Ellsberg at the University of California, Santa Cruz at the college's 9 and 10 multi-purpose room at 7:30. The event will be live streamed. You can go to democracynow.org for more information. Everyone is welcome. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura. Special thanks to Julie Crosby, Paul Huckabee. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.